everyone. Thanks for the kind invite and for the kind introduction, Reiner. It's great to be here. Could you perhaps give me like a 3-minute warning when I'm kind of down to 17? So the next 20 minutes, I will tell you about political entrepreneurship. As Reiner said, I was involved with the founding of a new party in Austria now 7 years ago in 2012, and I'll tell you a little bit about it and also about what other parties did. And as Reiner already mentioned, we have some political entrepreneurs actually here in this room, and I've talked to a couple of you yesterday, which is great. Political entrepreneurship, what does it actually mean, and why is it important? First start with the why. I think you're all aware that democracies in all over Europe are in changing at the moment, in transition. Some say they are declining, and there are some worrying signs. But in any way, the landscape is changing. There's a realignment. The political center in many places is hollowing out. And actually, 100 new parties have been founded since the last European elections all over Europe. And many of them have made it into parliament. Some of them already are in government. So what I'm describing is a phenomenon that I would call the third wave of entrepreneurship. And we're talking about the promotion of freedom here and the innovation of promotion of freedom. So, of course, entrepreneurs have been around for quite some time to promote and to innovate business. Now, the second wave started about 30 years ago. The second wave was about innovating the promotion of social justice. And this was the second wave of social entrepreneurship. Not entrepreneurship in terms of benefiting and profiteering, but in terms of tackling social challenges with an entrepreneurial mindset, with entrepreneurial tools, with the experience of entrepreneurs. You may know organizations like Ashoka, for example, and the Impact Hub and others who are really trying to promote social entrepreneurship. Now, what I'm describing now is the third wave of entrepreneurship, which is about using entrepreneurial tools to tackle political challenges, to tackle the innovation of democracy. This is what political entrepreneurship to me is about. It's about people founding new political parties to enter parliaments, to change the political systems from within. You can try to change a political system from the outside with an NGO, with a movement. That's fine and that's important. But what I'm describing is people founding new parties, trying to enter parliaments, of course also trying to enter governments sooner rather than later, and trying to change the political systems from within. This is what political entrepreneurship to me is about. And so I try to respond, try to find different approaches to answering this question. And the question is, if you want to found a new party, if you want to enter parliaments to change political systems from within, and you have about 1.5 years, 1.5 years to the next election, some parties have been quicker, some parties have done it in 6 months, some parties have taken longer, but something like 1 year to 2 years is quite common. And you start basically with nothing. Of course, you might, if you're lucky, you might have somebody like Macron, you might have a celebrity like Zelensky, you might have someone who's well known, but of course that is not only advantageous, that can also then become a problem if this person has some challenges of their own. So let's try to focus on, you don't have a celebrity, you don't have a sports person, you don't have a former politician, you are just someone who wants to found a new party and enter parliament. So where do you start? Think about that for a moment. Where do you start? What comes to your mind? Yes, just shout at me.
Team.
A team. A team? Oh, sorry. A team, thank you very much.
Value set.
Value set. What else? Team's value set.
Aims and objectives.
Aims and objectives. Sorry? A goal. The goal is quite clear. The goal is you want to enter parliament. Fundraising. So all of that is very important. And I'll try to walk you through quite quickly in the next 17, 18 minutes into the process that I've, in interviews with 7 political startups across Europe, more than 40 interviews from top party leadership to activists, I've mapped out the path. Of course, it's always a little bit different, but there's some common milestones that you need to reach to get to the next stage. So as Reiner said, this is the book that I've written. And the first thing I want to say to you is that, of course, this question I asked you is in some ways a trick question, because you don't start 1.5 years before an election. You actually, if you are the founder, you will have started earlier than that. Because the first thing that you need to do if you want to found a new political party is you need to understand the political system. You need to understand the figures. How much money do you need to be actually competitive? How many people do you need for all the regions, all the localities you might have? How many signatures do you need to actually get on the list? All of that math that you need to do, and all of the understanding you need to develop, that may take years. So those political startups, even if they were founded by citizens, those were not just citizens who just came up with the idea of funding political parties. They may have been advisors, they may have been consultants, they may have been some way involved in the political system. So they're not total outsiders, at least not the core team. They were in some ways insiders, even if they have not been in mandates before. But you need to develop a very strong understanding. For example, fundraising is something that many political startups underestimate and where they fail early on, because they don't realize that they might need a certain amount of money if you don't have, for example, this celebrity who can replace your organization, who can complement, what you actually do, because they already have the attention of the media. You need that kind of money to invest in your, for example, public relations and so on. So you need to understand what are you up against, what is the political market, what is your niche you potentially can fill, what is the need that is unfulfilled when it comes to the voters. All of that you need to have a very, very strong understanding of. Of course, you won't have an understanding of everything, so you need to recruit people. You need to recruit accomplices. You need someone who you can trust at this early stage, you can spar with. So there's a core team you need to establish, right? And you need to assemble this core team and start not in the, in the back room, but start discussing with other people how should we do this. And this brings us to the second stage. Once you understand whether your niche could be, once you understand what the problems are, what people are fed up with, where the need for change is, then you can go on to the second stage. And the second stage is that you need to start envisioning what would you change? What would be the policies that you would advocate? What would be different if your party would make it into government, would make it to parliament in first place? But of course, if you then made it into government, what would you do? How would the system look different if your party is in power? Now, today, and many of the political startups I've looked at, of course, this is not something that you write down in a list, but this is something that you may co-create, right? You can co-create stuff. You can use technology. You can brainstorm together. You can invite people. So you can already start at this early point, not only fundraising, which you need to start doing right from the beginning, but you can also start mobilizing from the very first minute. For example, with NEOS, there were 2 people who started the whole thing, who invited then 40 people. I was part of that group of 40 people, and who then grew from 40 people over the course of a few months to about 250 people. And some of them left again, some of them came back. But this basically constituted, in circles, the core group that grew into NEOS about 9 months later. So this envisioning, what I'm saying is, if you want to move quick, you want to have, first of all, make sure that you develop a substantial policy manifesto at this point. But the process that how you develop this policy manifesto can become a very important part of how you do things, and you can use it for mobilization. So if you then have this vision of how the political system, how policies should look differently, then of course you move on to the third stage, which is you start building it. If you have a political startup, your advantage of course is that you start with a blank sheet of paper, which is a huge advantage because you can build the organization as you like it to be. It's much, much harder, for example, for an established political party to introduce transparency, to introduce open primaries, to introduce term limits, all kinds of things that make you, if you will, that makes your party a better product on the political market than what is actually currently on offer. Again, NEOS, for example, is still the transparent party in Austria 7 years after its founding, because the other established parties just could not do it for reasons I do not have to explain, I guess. So you can build a more transparent, more open, more participative, more dynamic organization. And organization design is also one of the things I write in the book. It's one of the most underrated disciplines in politics because people didn't have to do it so far. But it's really, you can put it to your advantage because people will understand very, very directly that this is another kind of creature, another kind of political party, a genuine 21st century party. You can also start not only developing organization, but of course you can, for example, establish task forces and mapping out core policy areas. At this point, you don't need to have a full 130-page policy, but if you say education policy is central to what you want to do, and economic policy is essential to what you do, then you can, for example, invite experts and help you map out these policy papers so that you have something, again, you can put to the people. You can discuss the program online. You can make it a kind of a very open process and start building this organization from there. All right. So we're now building. There's dynamic building up. You get more and more supporters. You get some funds. But of course, then you need to consider that probably in 6 months or something like that, there will be an election. So you need to become competitive. You want to collect data. Data is part of this competitiveness these days. You want to, for example, talk to people. You want to collect, like En Marche did early on, for example, in a big listening campaign. You want to knock doors. You want to get people's opinions. You want to get people's addresses. You want to raise your flag in the political arena. Momentum in Hungary, for example, they did a very smart thing. They understood that Orban wanted to get the Olympic Games to Budapest, and that this was a very, very unpopular thing for many, not necessarily the majority, but for many people, they thought it was a waste of money and it was a huge organizational effort. And so they started with a petition against this Olympic Games. And as it turned out, nobody knew those people, but as it turned out, they gathered 200,000 votes within a very short amount of time. In a few weeks, they were standing outside in winter, collecting signatures, and they were suddenly all over the media, because the media started asking, who are those people who challenged the big and mighty Orban without money, and actually how did they pull off such an organizational feat in such a short amount of time? It didn't cost them any money to get this coverage. They just needed this idea, they needed the organizational effort, they needed to do it. It could have failed, of course, but they succeeded, and Orban had to retract this application. Huge success. So at this point, you might not have the money to challenge the parties in the market, but you might have the ideas, and you might try out different things. Not all of them will work, but if they do, you can raise your flag in the political arena, and suddenly you're there. Suddenly, you're in the first surveys. You only have 1% or 0.5%, but you're there. And then you run. And of course, that's super exciting. It's craziness all the time. You may have a lot of people who do it for the first time. But if you succeed, then you enter. And entering, as great as it sounds and as fantastic as it is, and I can still remember the moment when we knew that we were in, and it was one of the best moments of my life. It is a traumatic experience for political startups, because everyone plans to the day that they actually win the election, and then they win the election, and nobody has a plan for after that. So people knock on your doors and say, do I still have a contract? Because all the contracts have run out on the day of election, because you don't want to spend any more money, because you have to expect that you are not successful. The parliament calls and say, you know, in 2 weeks there's the inauguration, and then all the processes start, and you know, everyone kind of, and you, of course now you're a player, so your political competition starts to challenge you, and you know, sets you up for failure and sets traps and stuff. You make mistakes. You're now in the light of the public, right? Neos made some mistake and almost killed the party at the beginning. You make communication mistakes, you make recruiting mistakes, you put people, you suddenly realize that this person in this mandate actually should never have gotten that mandate, but now they have it, and you cannot just fire them because they have a free mandate, right? So all of that suddenly hits you. So this is why about half of political startups in the first period actually fail. You know, most of them fail before that. But even if you make it into the first, you know, in the first period, you fail, half of them fail afterwards. So it's brutal, you know, but still it's necessary, because the more startups try, the more we'll get through. So you enter, you try to survive. You try to survive your first period. And of course then what you try to do is you try to scale. You might have gotten in, you know, for example, the national parliament, or you might have gotten in the European parliament, or you might have gotten in on the local level. But there are many, many other levels that you're not in yet. So you need to prepare for the next election that might just be around the corner. Thank you. So you need to scale. You need to finance that scaling, right? You just have a huge amount of debt because you had to finance your last campaign with the banks, and suddenly the next campaign is around the corner, for you, which you don't have the money for, right? So you need to be, again, creative in terms of fundraising. For example, Neos has had some risk-carrying loans. So we said to people, if we get in, we pay you back. If we don't get in, you make it a donation. Now, if you have a realistic chance of getting in, people might actually do that gamble. If you're nowhere near the threshold, whatever it may be, they won't give you that money. But you have to find ways of scaling. You have to be strategic about it. You cannot run everywhere, potentially. So you have to have some KPIs, some key performance indicators to develop your, you know, to align your strategy to. Membership growth in a certain region. Articles in the media in a certain region. You will start to kind of, you know, say no to some things. Because, of course, suddenly you have all kinds of soldiers of fortune on your door. You know, you're so successful, everyone will want to work with you suddenly, but you don't want to work with everyone. Now, if you survive your first period, you will try to re-enter. And, you know, most of the parties that I've portrayed in my book have actually re-entered. Some of them are non-government. En Marche, for example, of course. Ciudadanos, in Spain, Progressivne in Slovakia have now managed to put the, you know, a female social justice lawyer president into office, which is, you know, huge. Neos are now in regional government in Salzburg. So many of them have been quite successful, but are still on the way, of course. So once you re-enter, then the final stage is that you want to generate an ecosystem of political change. It's not just about the party. You want to create an ecosystem where people, for example, I now have left Neos, I handed over. Of course, I'm still in touch with them. But I'm still, you know, for example, working in political innovation now at the Innovation and Politics Institute. Other people will have gone into foundations, will have gone into admin, into public service, but they still have the spirit of this political startup, and you want them in strategic, important positions, so they also can contribute to political change, not just within the party. And this is how, over time, you change the political paradigm, you change the political system, you get into coalitions, and you can have a real impact and make a real difference. So this is what political entrepreneurship is about, and I'm looking forward to your questions afterwards. Thank you very much.